What's up, everybody? This is Cecil Alexander with Jazz Lesson Videos, and today we're going to be talking about some approaches for soloing over rhythm changes. Rhythm changes is one of the most common forms in jazz. It's a 32-bar form characterized by its fast-moving changes, and it's based on the tune I Got Rhythm by George Gershwin. Early on in my jazz guitar journey, I remember being frustrated with rhythm changes because the changes move so quickly, and a lot of times it can be difficult to thread lines together in context and express yourself clearly. So through extensive transcription and listening to some of my favorite instrumentalists, I was able to find some ways of simplifying the harmony so that the tune no longer felt like an obstacle course. All the lines we're going to analyze today come from my latest resource with Jazz Lesson Videos, the Rhythm Changes Workbook. In the workbook, you'll find over 100 lines with step-by-step approaches for the tricky A section changes, as well as the B section, which includes some approaches for harmonic superimposition and substitutions. You'll also find various etudes over rhythm changes that go over some of these approaches in the context of the full tune. So if you're interested in digging a little bit deeper into any of these materials, feel free to check out the Rhythm Changes Workbook and use the coupon code RC5 for an additional $5 off. So let's get into the first concept that's going to be found in the first section of the workbook. So this first line is going to be over the 1 major 7, moving to 5/7 of 2 into 2 minor 7, then 5/7. This can be found in the first 2 measures of rhythm changes, and a lot of times this is what's going to trip soloists up. But there's a really helpful way of simplifying the harmony. If you just think about the 1 chord moving to the 5/7, you can really reuse a lot of melodic material that you might be able to freely use over other tunes, and you can still kind of get the same sort of weight of the harmony moving. So again, just 1 measure of the 1 chord to 1 measure of the 5 chord, and our line is going to sound like this. So we start off thinking of that 1 chord. We have this arpeggio that's preceded by a chromatic approach. So it's a D minor 7 with a C sharp before the root. And then we move down just the B flat major scale till we get to F, and then we're going to be thinking of our 5 chord where we're going to use the F dominant bebop scale descending 1 octave. So when you play that line by itself, you still kind of hear that voice leading of the full progression. So another way that you can think about simplifying the harmony is going to be by, rather than thinking of 1 measure of the 1 chord to 1 measure of the 5 chord, without any tensions on it, you can add altered tensions to that 5 chord just for a little bit more color. So we're going to do 1 measure of B flat major 7 moving to 1 measure of like F7 altered, where you could think of any altered tension. It could just be the sharp 5, flat 9, the sharp 9. It's really up to you. In this phrase, we're going to be highlighting the flat 13 and the flat 9 of F7. Our first measure, we have this sort of diatonic enclosure into the root of B flat major 7. And we go down kind of like an E flat major 5, 3, 2, 1 idea, moving then into D on that F7. And then we very quickly in the next beat are going to adjust ourselves into more of an altered sound, and we're going to highlight that flat 13. And we have a diatonic approach into the 5th, and we move down sort of like an F Phrygian dominant scale. There's our flat 9 moving to the 5th of the B flat major in the next measure. So full phrase will sound like this. So I find when you use delayed resolutions within a phrase and kind of make it sound like there's more harmony happening than there actually is. So even just 1 beat of that D on beat 1 of the F7 kind of makes it sound like you have a quick 2 minor 7 moving to that 5 altered sound. So it's a helpful thing to keep in mind to just kind of imply more changes than you might actually be thinking about. Now that we've talked about simplifying the 1-6-2-5 to just be 1 to 5, we can also play around with some substitutions off of that 5 chord. My favorite one is going to be the tritone substitution. So rather than doing B flat major to F7, we'll do B flat major to B7. So in our first measure here, we're just going to be using this really cool triplet chromatic approach, going from the 9th down to the 7th. And then we go down chromatically till we get to the 5th. And then we're going to do a enclosure into this D sharp or E flat. And then we're going to think of that as being the 3rd of this substitute chord, the B7. So from that 3rd, we use this pivot arpeggio. So there's going to be a D sharp minor 7 flat 5, which gives us the 3rd, the 5th, the flat 7th, and the 9th of B7. And then we're just going to go down the scale from the root, and then voice lead down a half step chromatically into F, which will be the 5th of the next B flat major there. So the full line will sound like this. So let's take a look at this next tip, which is going to come from another section of the workbook, where we're going to be looking at some helpful ways of simplifying the harmony for the second half of the A section. So in the second half of the A section of rhythm changes, you usually have a 2-5, F minor 7, B flat 7 that moves into E flat major. And then depending on what version of the tune you're playing, or even what recording you're listening to, you'll usually hear one of 3 options. So one will be E flat major moving to E diminished. Another will be E flat major moving to E flat minor. And then the other will be very closely related to that, which is E flat major moving to A flat 7. So that E flat minor and A flat 7 are kind of the same chord, more or less. So the cool thing is that you can feel free to really imply any of these as you're soloing over rhythm changes, and just kind of expect the accompanist to follow you. So for the 2-5 into the 4 chord, I usually will just think of B flat 7, ignore that F minor 7, because you're going to get more or less the same voice leading. And then in this example, in this section, we're going to be talking about playing lines that outline this 4 to 4 minor or flat 7-7 sound. So first, in this phrase, we're going to be going up an A flat major 7 arpeggio with a rhythmic variation attached to that, so we have an 8th note triplet. From there, we're going to go down to the 5th of that B flat 7, and then we move down to D, which will then become the 7th of E flat major. And we're going to have a diatonic enclosure into the root of that E flat major 7, and then another diatonic enclosure into the flat 7 of E flat minor 7. Then we're just going to go down a triad. So that's a G flat major triad. That's going to give us the flat 7, 5th, and the flat 3rd of E flat minor. And then we finally resolve into F, which is going to be the 5th of B flat major 7 in the next measure using this enclosure. So one more time, the full phrase will sound like this. So hopefully that shows how you can use arpeggios and simple triad shapes just to kind of imply all of this moving harmony. So for our next phrase, we're going to be talking about how to simplify the progression in the second half of the A section that goes from the 2-5 into the 4, and then 4 to sharp 4 diminished. So in this phrase, again, this is kind of another option that you have for the second half of the A section, is going from that 4 to sharp 4 diminished. And I find usually a helpful way of outlining the sharp 4 diminished is going to be to think of its related dominant chord, which I think of as being like an A7 altered sound. So I'm kind of thinking of like the 5-7 of 3, which is helpful because if I'm playing lines that suggest that sort of resolution, D minor and B flat major are pretty closely related, so it's going to sound like I'm voice leading smoothly into that B flat major sound. So in our first measure, where we have that 2-5 into the 4, again, I'm just going to be thinking of big B flat 7 chord, but I'm going to have some internal voice leading that kind of implies this 5 minor to the 5-7 of 4. So I start on C, and then I move down chromatically to B flat, keep going down chromatically to A flat, and then again chromatically down to G flat. So just that part of the line kind of sounds like or implies F minor 7, moving to B flat altered, B flat 7, sharp 5. So, and then I grab the third of that B flat 7, sharp 5 sound, and then I voice lead into the ninth of E flat major 7, move down from the ninth to the sixth, and then that also creates a chromatic enclosure using that D, C into C sharp, which is going to be the double flat 7 of E diminished 7th, but again, I'm thinking of it as being the third of A7, and then I just go up a triad from C sharp. So there's the third, fifth, root, and then the flat 7th, moving down to the fifth of B flat major 7. So the full line will sound like this. So this next line is going to come from another section of the workbook where we're talking about using some harmonic substitutions over the B section of rhythm changes. In this example, we're going to use the tritone sub of every other dominant chord in the B section. So we'll have 2 measures of D7, which is the original change, 2 measures of D flat 7, which will be the tritone sub of G, then 2 measures of C7, again the original chord change, and then into 2 measures of B7, which will be the tritone sub of F. A tritone sub is just a really great way of creating a little bit more tension when you're playing over dominant chords specifically. So in this line, on our D7, we're going to start off with a diatonic approach to the flat 7th. We use a pivot arpeggio on that C, which is going to be a C major 7. And so we have 1, 3, 5, 7 against that D7. That's going to give us flat 7, 9, 11, and 13. We move down a step within the scale to the 5th, and then down to the 3rd diatonically, and then going to kind of anticipate my next chord change by 1 beat by doing this enclosure into E flat, so from E, D, E flat. Then I'm already thinking of this substitute chord of D flat 7, so I'm thinking of that E flat as being the 9th. I move down chromatically using chromatic approach to the root of that D flat 7, then again chromatically to the flat 7. And you could also think of that C to C flat as being like the bebop scale passing tone. Once I get to the flat 7th of that D flat 7, I'm going to use the same sort of pivot arpeggio idea I did in the first measure, where I use the C flat or B major 7 pivot arpeggio, move down diatonically within the scale to the 3rd, and then I do one of my favorite devices to use on a dominant chord that's just kind of finding these major 3rd shapes to connect chromatic ideas. So we have, which creates a major 3rd between the 3rd and the root. Outside of the scale, we have E to C, and then finally our target note of E flat, which is going to be the 9th. So as the rhythm section is playing the original chord change of G7, this D flat 7 sub is going to be creating all sorts of interesting tensions against that chord change. Namely, on the first beat of that chord, we're going to have the flat 5. We're also going to have the sharp 9 being highlighted, and we finally finish the phrase on the flat 13th, or the sharp 5 again. So then our next measure on C7, again, we're going to be inside the chord changes at this point. We're going to have this cool chromatic enclosure that's going to move into the flat 7th, starting on the and of 1. Then we move up a 1, 2, 3, 5 shape on B flat. So that's all diatonic to like C mixolydian. We move down within the scale to the 3rd. And then we again have those major 3rd shapes within the scale, but not connected by chromaticism this time. So just a 3rd between E and C, and a 3rd between D and B flat. Then we move down a step to A, the 6th, connected chromatically to the 5th, And then finally, on our 5-7 chord, we're going to be thinking of B7, the flat 2 dominant or the tritone sub. We're going to start off with the sharp 4, moving up to the 5th. You could also think of that as just being a chromatic approach. And then we're going to have this diatonic material moving into the flat 7th of that B7, then another 1, 2, 3, 5 shape off of the flat 7th of B7. And then we're going to have a chromatic enclosure into the 5th of B7, and then we just move down the scale diatonically, and then do a chromatic enclosure into the 3rd of the B flat major that'll happen at the top of the last A section. So again, with that B7 sub, you're getting all this really cool tension against this F7. First, you have that flat 9 happening there. At the end of that measure, you're going to have the natural 7th, which even though it's being used in passing is going to create this really stark sound against the F7 chord sound. And then at the end there, you have a really clear outline of that B major sort of shape, moving to B flat. And that also creates a nice voice leading of just a flat 2-to-1 sort of resolution. So our next tip is going to be another helpful way of adding some more tension to the B section using some harmonic substitutions. So in this example, we're going to be playing a minor 3rd above each chord change in the B section, which is going to effectively create kind of a substitute progression that goes on underneath. So over D7, we're going to be playing F7. Over G7, we'll be playing B flat 7. Over C7, we're going to be playing E flat 7. And over F7, we're going to be playing A flat 7. And obviously when you're soloing over the B section, you don't have to stick to this exact progression, but it just kind of gives you a little bit more to work with. And you can sort of recycle some of your ideas and make them sound a little bit more fresh in the context of the changes. So on our first measure here of D7, we're going to start with a really clear, just sort of scalar outline of F7, our substitute change, up a minor 3rd. So we're using that sharp 4 of the F7 scale. You could also just think of it as being a chromatic approach into the 5th. Then we have the diatonic enclosure into the flat 7th of that chord. And against that D7 that the rhythm section is playing is going to be the flat 9. Then we do a chromatic enclosure into the 6th of F7, move down chromatically to the 5th. Then we just move all the way down the scale until we voice lead into D, which we're going to think of as being the 3rd of B flat 7. So just looking at those first 2 measures one more time. Then we have the 3rd of that B flat 7. Off the 3rd, we're going to use D minor 7 flat 5 arpeggio. And it's important to think about what kind of tension that's creating over the original chord change. So D will be the 5th of G7, F will be the flat 7th, A flat will be the flat 9, and then C will be the 11th. So you're getting an interesting mix of tension more outside of the scale notes and inside the scale notes, especially with that flat 9 to the 11th. Then we move down a step within the B flat dominant scale to the root, where we're going to do an enclosure diatonically to the flat 7th. Then we leap down to the 9th and then back up to where we were before, so kind of an octave displacement thing into the 6th of B flat 7 down to the 5th. Then over E flat 7, which will be our substitute chord change, over C7. We're going to start on C and then go up a D flat major 7 arpeggio. So again, that creates really cool tension over that C7. So we're going to have flat 9, 11th, flat 13th, and then the root. Then we're going to land on the flat 6 of that E flat dominant scale. We'll resolve it to the 5th using an enclosure. And again, against that C7 that we're playing over, that's going to be the natural 7th, moving to the flat 7th, which is really hip. Then we're going to go up an arpeggio off the 5th of our substitute chord, E flat 7. We have B flat minor 7, which is going to be against that C7, flat 7, flat 9, the 11th, and then the flat 13th. And then we move down a step within the scale, do a chromatic approach into the 9th, then voicely chromatically into the flat 7th of A flat 7, which is our substitute in relation to F7, and we just go down a 5, 3, 2, 1 cell, land on the flat 7th, and then finally land on the root of that F7, or the 13th of our A flat 7. So full line, when you put it together, will sound like this. So lastly, I'm going to be playing a full chorus over rhythm changes using all the concepts we talked about in this video, as well as some additional concepts from the full rhythm changes workbook. So that concludes today's video. Thank you for watching. I hope these concepts were helpful. Again, if you feel like digging a little bit deeper into some of these concepts, feel free to check out the full rhythm changes workbook. And don't forget to use the coupon code RC5 for an additional $5 off. And if you feel like it, please leave a comment, like, and subscribe because it really helps this channel grow. I'll see you next time.